Just going to give it a few minutes as everybody is coming in. Okay. All right. So in the interest of time, we'll get going. So welcome everyone to our third and final webinar in this year's mental health series. And this one is on preparing athletes for provincial championships and handling mental skill building and performance anxiety. So I'm very excited to have a lot of people here with me today to talk about this topic. My name is Emma Gibbons, and I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Volleyball BC. And I would like to start by acknowledging that we work across this whole province, but that our head office is based on the traditional and unceded territories of the Tsleil-Waututh, the Squamish, and the Musqueam First Nations. And we are very honored to be residing here and talking from here tonight with all of you. And I just also wanted to add a little bit of a context around these webinars. When we do our annual member survey, we ask people about services or programs that they would like to see from Volleyball BC. And we always have a lot of people ask for different areas of mental health support. And so these really have been a chance to respond to some of the topics that you have put forward as finding interesting and needing some more information on. So I'm very, very excited to hand you over to Dr. Shaunna Taylor, who many of you may recognize because she's been on a bit of a journey with Volleyball BC. And she's a registered clinical psychologist, and she will be taking us through and facilitating this evening, along with our mental health ambassadors, Shanice and Derek. So over to you, Shaunna.
Thanks, Emma. I just want to make a quick clarification that it's psychotherapist and not psychologist, but it's very close and it's really easy to mix up. Plus, I'm the former chair of the Canadian Sports Psychology Association, so how could you not make that mistake? So it's all good, and very excited to be here because this is a topic, obviously, that's very near and dear to my heart. And I'm so excited to also have Shanice and Derek, who are here in the position of mental health ambassadors, but also with a ton of playing experience, also coaching experience. Currently, at the moment, I know Shanice wears two hats in her player self, but also as a coach right now, coaching in high performance as well, and Derek in the mental health space as a counselor as well. So we've got a ton of experience here and so excited. We're not sure if Kyla's going to be able to join us tonight. Probably not. We think that she may be already double booked, very busy woman herself, but very excited, the three of us, to be joining Emma for this really important topic tonight. I took a very close look at the spreadsheet that Emma said to me with all of the feedback that she'd gained from the tools that she sends out to the membership every year that she spoke about. So I tried to cover as much ground as I can, but I have to say, I mean, they're great, weren't they, Emma? They were so many excellent questions. It's hard to fit them all into one, but did the best that I could. And they sort of fit into some sub-themes. So I've tried to weave them in throughout the evening. Let's do our best to cover some of these topics. So we're going to start out by looking at building a perspective, or like making sure that we can shift perspective to one that is balanced and one that is helpful when it comes to athlete and coach and even parent perspectives as well, because I know there might be some parents that are going to be watching this as well. So this isn't just for your athletes or your children. This is for you too, in terms of building that perspective. The second section will be it's kind of a combination of the two in the middle. So self and co-regulation strategies or self-regulation strategies, as well as building resiliency. So different skills that come from the mental performance realm, but also the mental health realm. And hopefully you'll find them very practical. These are going to be hands-on things that you can do on the court, off the court, pre-performance, post-performance. So lots of really applied ideas. And then the last section is on athlete identity and creating a more balanced identity and ways that we can create balance on teams. Because as we head towards things like major championships, feels like there's a lot on the line. Athlete identity starts to become really, really important and present. And sometimes almost a little bit off the charts, if you will, in terms of being balanced. So we'll discuss that a little bit towards the end of the evening. But this is what we're going to cover tonight. And so we'll get started. And then, as we've done in the past, if you've seen some of our webinars before, you'll know that we'll be weaving in the amazing feedback from the ambassadors. And I welcome them to pop in at any time if they think of something from real life experience or an applied experience that they could bring to a topic. Don't be afraid to jump in, Derek and Shanice. I also like to reiterate, because I brought this up last year when I presented on performance anxiety, that I'm really very deliberate and very intentional about the language that I use in my practice, but also when I'm working in team sessions. And while I recognize that we use the term mental toughness a lot, it's also out there in the research and the literature. Sure, we've got to be mentally tough. What we also have to make sure that we are is that we're also mentally flexible, and that mental flexibility or emotional agility, mental agility is just as important as those resiliency skills. They go hand in hand, and that it's important to talk about both. So it isn't just about you being tough all the time. It's also that you need to be able to flex according to what's in front of you and what kind of demands are in front of you. So I think we need to be careful about the language that we use so that we can get athletes to open up, but also see that sometimes feeling a little more unstable or feeling unsure is actually just part of the human experience, that you're allowed to feel all the different emotions that we get as humans. That's what makes sports so exciting, but also so challenging. So just wanted to start with that as something to talk about. Because many of the questions are focused on performance anxiety, so there are several that specifically talk about spiked anxiety levels, I thought it was important to revisit again what anxiety really is and the purpose that it serves, because it does in fact serve a very important purpose. I think one of the overarching definitions or the ways that many athletes and their parents might view anxiety is, it's a really negative thing. It's uncomfortable. It's when I start to feel worried or nervous or fearful. And sure, it is really common. It's our brain's way of, our brain detects some kind of threat, whether it's a threat to our safety or maybe it's a threat to our ego, all kinds of threats. But it may overcompensate, and sometimes it may even negatively impact our physical and our mental health if it spikes too high and too broadly for too long. So it's important to know what anxiety is and know that it's there to keep us alert and aware. It's part of our survival mechanism, and it's very important in sport because it helps to spike important hormones and chemical processes that happen in our nervous system to get us ready for a really tough challenge ahead of us, like physical challenges in volleyball, obviously, but also it can be overwhelming. So being mindful of what your level of anxiety is and how you view your level of anxiety or your perspective is really important. So I thought it was important to talk about that first of all. And so we're going to start with reframing high stakes moments, or really what seems to be really, really important competitions or games or must-win scenarios, reframing them, meaning putting them into perspective. So I've got the question here: how do we help athletes who put too much pressure on themselves to not implode in or out of competition? And this was actually one of the questions. Okay, so this was specifically one of the questions. What can we do? So first thing is we want to say exactly what I just said, that we want to kind of normalize that a certain amount of anxiety is actually to be expected, and it's sort of quote unquote typical, right? So everybody is going to feel that when it's important to them. If it matters to you and your ego is involved because you've worked really hard and you want to be able to show off all the skills that you've put together as a team, well, you're going to feel somewhat nervous, right? You're going to feel a little bit of anxiety no matter who you are, right? And how prepared you are. But being able to put things into a more balanced perspective, that it's important, but it's not the only thing that's important. That's where we're going to start tonight, and ways that we can talk about balancing it. So I don't know if any of you have heard, I like to use storytelling a lot in my practice when I'm explaining different concepts, especially to developing athletes, young athletes, so that they can get an idea as to what the broader sort of academic, very complex psychology principle is. So I really like the story of the Taoist farmer or the Chinese farmer, it can be called sometimes. And I modify that story and try to make it make sense in the sport context. The story behind the story is that really the meaning behind the story is that life is about 10%, or it's a small percent of what actually happens to us, but it's 90% of how we frame it or how we respond to it. So a very small percentage is what happens. Could be good news, could be bad news, who knows? But the perspective we take on it is important. So I'll give you some examples. Say you win the pool in a round robin play or early on in a tournament. Yay, it's good news, and everyone's celebrating and everyone's all in because the outcome is what mattered and we won and it's good news. But then you find out the next day or the day after, oh, because we won our pool, the top ranked team actually didn't have a great day, or a couple people were injured, or a couple people didn't turn up. Now we're actually, because we did so well, we are playing the top ranked team. Oh no, bad news. So something that seemed like good news yesterday suddenly feels like bad news, and we can flip flop up and down depending on how we interpret whether it was good news or bad news. Honestly, who knows? What it really is how you decide to use that news. Are you going to use that news as something that you're going to grow from and benefit from? Or is it going to be framed in a way that, oh no, everything's working against us? You could say the same thing. You have a veteran athlete that you're really counting on going into this tournament, and suddenly they call in sick. Oh no, what? No, that's our starting setter. No, that's our best power hitter, right? But the rookie replacement that really hasn't had a chance to step in, hasn't really been tested yet, may actually have the performance of a lifetime to that point, because there is now some space in the roster and there's a more open slate. So you just never know. So give some of these volleyball related examples of how perspective is actually more important than what happened as an outcome, right? So you can think about this as a team, or if you're watching this as an athlete or as a parent, think about times how you framed things in the past where you could have put the good news, bad news, who knows, spin on things. See if you can go a little more zen. So that's one concept. Another thing that coaches like to do, or I like to do when I'm working with athletes, is get them to really watch their language when they're talking about perspective. It's like, oh, this thing happened to me. This keeps happening to us. If you even just change one little word, like this is happening for me, this is happening for us, suddenly it becomes a good news, bad news, who knows, right? So this, like, really, say a really tough thing happened. If you say this really tough thing happened to me, now it almost puts you in like a victim-like statement or a victim-like perspective. Oh no, it's happening to me. But if you frame it that it's happening for us to learn or to grow or to meet the challenge, that one little word and a shift in perspective can really change everything in how your team is viewing that particular scenario, or how you are facing that scenario as an athlete. So be aware of the kind of language that you're using and the words that you're using within your own head. So your self-talk, and that talk that you have in your head, the way you talk to yourself, is centered around things that you can actually control and potentially spin in a more positive or helpful way. So that takes us to this concept, because we've mentioned it in some of the past webinars, and I want to just draw attention to the fact that if you haven't watched the one from last year, or maybe it was even the year before, I don't remember, Emma, it might have been 2023, I don't remember, but we've got a whole YouTube channel now of several of them. We do talk in a couple of our past webinars about having more of a growth mindset versus fixed mindset. It is the optimal playoff mindset, having a growth mindset, that what you're going to focus on is largely, the success is largely determined by your effort and how focused everyone is on their tasks and their roles. That honestly, it isn't just about natural abilities or outcomes. It's about effort and it's about focus. It's about learning, growing, and improving. So all these things that you're seeing here in the right-hand column, and you can find this on a number of great websites. The True Sport website through the Canadian Centre for Ethics in Sport does a great job of it. There are also some really great resources that are geared towards just growth mindset in sport. So you can go ahead and do a search on that. And I can maybe even put together some that we can add to our materials listing, Emma, that we can put in on your website. But make sure that you educate yourself on the differences between fixed mindset and growth mindset. And you as an athlete or as a parent can decide, we're going to be a growth mindset family. We're going to view our feedback and the way that we're going into provincials. We're going in this year with a growth mindset attitude, and the language that we use will be growth mindset. You also want to make sure that you're checking in on, if you want to avoid that sense of overwhelm and you want to be able to somewhat normalize the nerves, you want to normalize this idea that you're probably going to be more out of your comfort zone and possibly more in your challenge zone when you're going into really important competitions that matter to you. So what does that look like? Well, the challenge zone, and this document is also available in the toolkit that we offer through Volleyball BC. You might find that there's a little more increased worrying. There might be some occasional anxiety or irritability, right? Some of the tougher emotions might start to show up. Maybe you're starting to need a little bit more recovery time. You're feeling a little more fatigued. There might be some interruptions in sleep. So plan for that in advance. And we're going to get to that in a few minutes of ways that you can manage some of the discomfort of being in more of a challenge zone state in your mental health platform. Another thing you may want to do, and some athletes I recommend that they have a journal, a training journal that they can write in and just reflect on as they're heading into major tournaments, is I'm going to reframe this idea of feeling pressure. Pressure to me is going to be I'm going to have a new perspective on feeling pressure this year. So when I start to feel really high energy, or even what I would have seen as anxiety in the past in competition, I'm going to spin it into, I've got like really high positive energy, and I'm going to direct it in a certain direction. Okay. So high activation level means high positive energy, can do energy. Let's do this. And sometimes just being aware of that and how you can channel that can help. So for some athletes, they find that a useful activity. You can also have a session with your team. So you could always have a group, you as a group of athletes could get together and talk about, what is our love for the game? What do we love about volleyball? Why volleyball? Why are we going to provincials? What's cool about it? What's fun? Right? And really revisit that love for the game. That's that positive energy that I was talking about in the previous one. Love for the game can bring out some of that positive energy. If it's all about outcomes, you're forgetting all the other amazing reasons that you play: friendship, skill building, travel, doing cool things together that have nothing to do with volleyball, right? So thinking about that. Also, even how you could perceive a love of competing. It's kind of cool to put yourself to the test, right? It isn't all doom and gloom, and it isn't all deep pressure. It's also kind of exciting, and it's fun, and it's a chance to showcase all your hard work through the year. So how you view your love of competition, instead of, I like the practicing and I like the travel, but I don't know if I really like the high stakes competition. Well, telling yourself that you love competition, or you're going to find a new relationship to loving competition, maybe this is your year to do that. And then the last one, thinking about different life lessons from volleyball. So what have you learned? What has volleyball taught you that has really nothing to do with just the sport skills? There are probably so many different communication skills, way to socialize, how to give and take feedback and improve technique. There's so many things. I'm not even going to go through all of them here, but there are so many really great ones. So make a list for yourself of all of those things that you've been learning all along since you've joined this really cool sport. Okay, so that's another skill building one. Other ideas are having a moment for reflection, or having a specific time when you reflect. So it could be, maybe you do journaling and you do that after practices heading into provincials, or maybe you do a little, we call them debriefs or after action meetings after your practices, after your games, where you talk about what you learned, what are some things that you would do differently if you could. And depending on your age and stage of the athlete, some of these could be super short or some could be a little bit longer. And you go around the whole group and see what everybody has to say. Or also on the last point here, keeping track of specific goals that you might have had that aren't anything to do with winning or losing. They're measured instead by other types of goals called process or performance goals, which we're going to talk about in a second. So these, just going back quickly, ways that you can reflect and start thinking and pulling different lessons. Remember, growth mindset, right? This is about you growing, not just about winning, right? It's about you growing as a global, holistic athlete. So these are some really great ways that you can enhance that through reflection. And then going again on one of the previous notes that I said, a different relationship with this idea of competing. So having a compete over winning emphasis. So like, I showed up really to learn how to compete. So a lot of people will argue when I'm bringing up these growth mindset things, or growth mindset tips, they'll say, well, that's like avoiding athletes, pitting them against each other. They need to learn how to toughen up. They need to learn how to win and want to win. Well, of course they do. I mean, that's all part of growth mindset, but it's learning to compete. It's not just the winning is the outcome that you have no control over. The competing you have control over, right? You get to decide if you came to compete or not. You don't really get to decide if you win. You can improve your odds, but you actually don't have complete control over whether you win or not, or lose. But you do have the concept of competing as a team, really showing up, and you have some power over that. So knowing the difference and maybe even having a team discussion about that. Your coach could facilitate it, or maybe your team leadership group could talk about it. We're going to go in to compete and to grow. Those might be two of our main goals, right? So you decide, you get to decide, but that can often really help with managing some of that competitive pressure. And then lastly, before I turn it over in a second to our athlete ambassadors, I will have athletes go through some specific goal setting as they're heading into major tournaments so that they keep track of two of these different types of goals that have nothing to do with scores, and they have nothing to do with whether you win or lose or not. The process goals are the little things, positive daily actions like showing up for practice, making sure I have a good snack that I bring with me, staying hydrated, getting a good night's sleep. Some of those really great life skills and athlete skills that you get on the daily, those are process goals. And those are super important, and they're totally in your control, right? Outcomes aren't. Process goals are. Performance goals then might be things like there could be some statistics that you're aiming for. You're really trying to be as accurate as possible, whether you're more of a defensive specialist or offensive specialist. Maybe you really want to stay as focused as possible. You want to be a good communicator. So you're going to be loud on the bench when you're in a support role. Whatever that looks like, think of some aspects of your performance that you will be exhibiting in provincials, and don't get too stuck on how things are going to turn out in terms of outcomes. See if you can think about your personal contribution and accepting your role and doing your role as best you can. What would those goals look like? And how would you measure them? And so those two can make an athlete feel a lot more empowered and a little less nervous about the outcomes. So those are just a few ideas in terms of building perspective, that it's not all about going into these major competitions and feeling the pressure of winning or losing. And so I'm going to turn things over at this point to Shanice or Derek. So just thinking about how you managed this idea of competition and pressure as you came up through your athlete development pathway, and how do you keep things in perspective? And even now, Shanice, how do you do it as a coach? And Derek, how do you do it? I don't know who wants to start, but I'll leave it to you to decide.
I can go first.
Okay.
Um, yeah, it was really interesting listening to what you had to share. It kind of made me reflect on when I was really young. And I feel like every time we do these, I always have different answers to these questions, which is maybe like the best part. Maybe not so good that the answer is always different, but anyways, I think when I was in club volleyball and kind of towards the end of my club career, kind of in like the grade 10 and grade 11 stages of my career, I got to a point where um, I felt like I was good and pretty talented, but I was maybe on a team where I valued winning a lot more than the rest of my teammates. And I think that added a level of competition and pressure where it always felt stressful and like I wanted to win and I was working so hard to win, but nobody else necessarily was. And then it took the joy out of playing for me for a while. It took the joy out of competing, and it left me um, in a place where I wasn't actually in it in those tournaments. And so there's a different element of stress and pressure that came with that. And I worked a little bit to try and change my thinking. And I think when we're talking about growth mindset and fixed mindset, that was something that I had to learn how to do pretty young. Um, and so in my later tournaments, when there is a little bit more pressure because you're playing in a provincials or a national championships, I changed my thinking from wanting to win and realizing that maybe I was the only person that wanted to win to I really want to work on being a great spin server. I'm going to do spin serving for this whole tournament and let's see how that goes rather than just focusing on the outcome of it. I think that helped me get more into myself and more into my body and more present in the experience. And it became a little bit more enjoyable when it used to be maybe a little bit more pressure or stress for different reasons. I think as I got older in my career, I did struggle with anxiety and nerves to a degree, and you kind of already touched on it as well. But I recognize that those things were important, that those things are good, and it was just a matter of finding the balance of like how much of that is good, how much of that can I control, is that causing my mind to go elsewhere? What do I need to do to change it so that I can get back again to this place of joy, to this place of being present and this place of like being in my body and feeling in my body, because when I could do that, that's when the performance was always its best. So I don't think your experience with competing is like linear and that it's always perfect or that you're always um, going to be enjoying the experience for whatever reasons. I think there's always going to be challenges along the way, but finding something to ground you, finding something to bring it back to how can you get into yourself, into your body, maybe out of your mind a little bit more. So yeah, just wanted to share a little bit of that reflection because it brought me back to my club days and some things I've struggled with and yeah, how I kind of grew throughout that.
I love that. Thank you so much, Shanice. What about you, Derek?
Um, yeah, I think there's definitely some, I don't know, some similar pieces there. I think what Shanice was saying that definitely resonated and probably would echo as well. I was thinking about some stuff that I guess around the pressure piece and sort of the idea of uh, how often like when I feel pressure, I want to like pull away and like or how like such a strong feeling that it can cause me to want to like turtle and how difficult that can make it to then perform at anything, just like when we're in that sort of fight or flight response, it can really restrict us. And so I think one of the things that's helped me even over the years as I've kind of gotten older is, and I think you kind of touched on this too, is that like pressure isn't necessarily bad. Pressure is often a sign of something, and the anxiety that comes with it is a sign that there's something that really matters. There's something that's here that I'm really wanting to be present to in a way. And I think that perspective of it's almost like this idea of like, can I say yes to this? Like, can I say yes to these feelings that I'm having? The sensations of like pressure, like, ooh, like that's a little bit, sometimes it's the pit in the stomach or it's the nerves. And this is probably a bit of like a practice, not something you can just kind of pull out in the moment, but like even just getting a little more used to when pressure shows up in training where I feel like, ooh, like, okay, serves on me, like people are watching. Can I notice what that feels like, the kind of tightening that might be there? And almost just like sometimes it's that flipper perspective of like, oh, I can have this. Like this is I'm okay with this. And you can do I even do this in like counseling sometimes with people where I'll get them to look around the room and like look at things from a position of like no and see what happens. Like no to that lamp, no to that plant. And all of a sudden you get this like really like, I don't like that plant. I don't like that lamp. And then I get them to do it with a yes. And all of a sudden there's like, oh, interesting. That lamp is kind of, I never noticed that. Or that plant that kind of reminds me of something. And I think it just like that, it's such a simple flip, but I find that can just open us up to, definitely open myself up to like that idea of like, I can have this. This is okay. This is manageable. This is like, I can work with this. So I think that was like one piece. The other one, and you mentioned like stories, and I think this just got me thinking about stories as well, and the power of like our own story, and thinking about, using the power of like, can you remember a time in your life where you felt pressure and you got through it, where you felt nervous, where you felt anxious, you felt that kind of like, whoa, this is a big moment, and you managed to get on the other side of it. And it's kind of like an analogy I've heard around this is like you're on the deep, you're in that diving board, the 10 meter, and you jump into the deep end. And in the deep end and in the jumping, you like learn so much about yourself. And so I think about looking back on some of the times in my life where I've gone through something difficult, faced some pressure. Uh, I learned a lot about my resilience. Like I think about injuries I've overcome, losses I've dealt with, the pressure that came with that. And just that alone is like so meaningful because it's like, that wasn't it. That wasn't even, that was me. Like I did that. And then when I go into new pressure situations, I have that on my tool belt. I can be like, well, I've faced this before, or I faced something else before. And I was thinking about that answer too. And if you don't feel like you have that, this is where we get to draw on our heroes. Think about like all the heroes from TV shows, comic books, just like stories that you've heard. So many of those have stories of the hero facing pressure and being challenged and tested, and then they come through the other side. And I think that in itself can also be really encouraging because it's like we're all heroes of our own story. But I don't know. I think that like our ability to face that stuff that feels very scary we're more capable than we realize. And I think it's just finding those ways to kind of tap into that that are really helpful.
So awesome. The two of you were so complimentary too, because yeah, Shanice is really kind of applied and autobiographical. And then yours sort of, Derek, on the storytelling side, but then also your first concept too is a little bit like the good news, bad news, who knows, kind of
Yeah.
like taking the two sides of something and deciding that you're gonna spin it to what serves you in that moment. Yeah,
Yeah.
just that little flip of accepting the lamp or the plant, or
Right.
not, right? I love that.
Yeah. Well,
Thank you.
so I remember one other thing, sorry, is you talked about even that the language we use sometimes. And I always love replacing the word but with and when we're talking about, especially like emotions, where it's like, I'm feeling pressure, but I don't know how to, and I'm uncertain if I can do this, but I don't know if I can do this, or like, I'm excited, but I don't know if I could, and I think it's just like sometimes using the words like, again, I'm feeling excited and this is a big moment, right? And it's like, it's sort of this idea like two things can exist in the same moment. Just thinking in terms of like perspective flips too.
That's why I think it's so important that this idea of mental toughness, so in a lot of the resiliency literature or the mental toughness early literature, it was very black and white thinking,
Mm-hmm.
But emotional agility shows like you can be all over the spectrum and two things can be true. You can be tough, but you can also need help. And that's okay, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, teaching young people, athletes as they're developing that is very much true. And I guess that's a great segue into sort of the middle section of tonight's webinar is thinking about different mindfulness approaches, mind-body techniques of how athletes can manage all the many, many, many emotions they're going to feel and all the thoughts that are going to come in through the course of a provincial championship or as you're wrapping up your club season, what that might look like. So some different techniques. These are different from, because it's a huge suite of techniques in the field of sport and performance psychology is massive. So If you want to go back and listen to some of the previous webinars, we discussed some other, so this, I try not to be too repetitious. So these are different, with maybe a few nuanced similarities to some previous webinars. But this particular slide is where we're talking about mistake rituals, or ways if you've made an error, or you feel like you're underperforming and you're kind of stuck in it and you can't seem to get out. Different athletes like to have certain rituals or practices that they can start to use in their practice, so that then when it comes to competition, they can do it under more pressure. So one, you've got the hand here of someone, looks like they're cutting, like they're playing rock, scissors, paper. These are meant to be scissors, okay? And so I got this idea from working with this ball related sport also, but softball and fastball and baseball, where if I'm working individually with an athlete and I would be present on tour with them and look out at the field, and I could see someone is starting to get really tense, they're making some errors and they're getting overwhelmed, and you can almost see the pressure, the shoulders going up, or the facial expression, things are getting tight or they're getting small. And then I would just remind them, cut some slack, that part, that plays over, And so just even having that little hand gesture as a way to remind them, no one knows even what it means. Well, they know what it means, that it's time to cut some slack. Okay, you're right. Cut some slack. So what might that mean? That means, okay, telling them, maybe adjusting their self-talk. So how they're talking to themselves about that moment, maybe accepting what happened, accepting how they're feeling in the moment, but knowing that that particular spot they're in isn't super helpful for the next ball or the next play. So taking that deep breath maybe while listening to the self-talk and using that cue to get themselves out of it. Another way, and I'm going to talk in more detail about ways you can co-regulate if you keep making the same errors over and over again, or you feel yourself tightening up, you can regulate with your teammates. So you're not on your own. And we have discussed this in past webinars. It's what I love so much about volleyball, is there's so much teamwork involved. So co-regulation is just like self-regulation, except you're regulating together. So we're going to talk about that in a few slides. But that's a really important, when you underperform, or say you've had an error, it wasn't planned, other ways you can get rid of it or you can move on is to co-regulate with others. Some athletes will have a very specific thing that they will say, and a very mindful way is to just let something go, because it is done. It is in the past now. So playing in the moment and being present is not something that we are wired for. Unfortunately, we're not like dogs. Dogs are great. They just live in the moment. You do something with a dog, 2 minutes later, they've totally forgotten about it, right? They're just in the moment all the time. Well, with humans, we have really good memories and we can get stuck in the memories. So letting it go, and maybe having a phrase that helps you let it go, maybe even shaking it out. So you could do something physical, you could shake it out. Lots of athletes have physical rituals that they do to let something go. Let that point go, let that play go. It's done. Right? So feeling something physically and emotionally, and a mental release. So you can rehearse using something like that in practice. And then of course, something like a breath, or physically parking that feeling and that thought, eventually accepting it, but letting it pass through you, and then decide that that isn't useful to me right now. So I'm just going to park it. Okay. Once it's made its way through. And when we're in the middle of performance, it's not like you want to wait 10 minutes or 30 minutes for it to pass. Like you're in the middle of a game, you kind of want to speed it up. So having some of these practices and mindfulness practices, they're great because they're not super, they're not adversarial. You're not fighting yourself. It's more like you are going with the flow, but you're also recognizing that you want to be in the present as much as possible. So you'll find over time, if you practice them, some of those tough emotions like anger or other forms of discomfort will pass a little faster, and the cycle will pass on through in a more expedited way or a faster way than it did before. So, but it takes practice. So it's no better time than now. So you can start practicing some of those skills now. Other athletes will tell me it's not even just the motions, it's I keep having the same thoughts over and over again. I have the same way that I talk to myself when I'm in really tough pressure spots. I get so worried. I start predicting, oh, watch me. I'm just going to serve it right into the net. I know it, right? They're predicting. Or maybe during warm up, they glance across the net and they go, whoa, okay, that team looks really good. What the heck? And they start comparing right away. Or they start doubting their skill. For whatever reason, our brains start identifying threats and measuring us up against others, and we come up short every time. Or we regret something that we didn't do. Oh, I should have practiced this more. I should have done this more. Whether it falls in those 4 categories, or maybe there's some other category, some athletes, I'll get them to just think of the files. What are your usual self-talk sort of little mini traps that aren't super helpful, that we're not going to give as much listening power to in the coming days? What are they? And I'll get them to sort of think about that for a second, because usually they're patterns with your personality. Certain things happen again and again and again, right? And that is something that we have to accept. It has to do with our life experience. It has to do with some of our sport experiences growing up. It has to do with personality. It has to do with the way we manage anxiety. And none of them are wrong. They're just our nature. So being able to accept that some of those thoughts, we call them intrusive thoughts, are going to happen, and they're probably going to continue to happen. It's almost impossible to block all intrusive thoughts, right? They're going to happen, but some thoughts are helpful and some aren't. So I even recommend that we not tell athletes that they're positive or negative necessarily, more so that they're helpful or not helpful. Because who's to say if a thought is positive or negative? According to who? Right? Sometimes some thoughts actually might look negative, but they result in some great results. Are they helpful or not? If they're not helpful, what are your categories? And as you're thinking it, tell yourself, there's a prediction again, and just put it in your prediction file. I know this all sounds very up in the sky. Okay, this is a really cognitive or mental exercise, but over time and with some dedication, any athlete at any age can practice these type of skills. Emma, did you have a question about that?
I was just going to jump in and see if anybody had any questions, or just to remind them that they can put it in the chat. That's all.
Oh yeah, please
But
do.
yes,
I
please
know
do, and I will moderate. I'm keeping an eye on it, but yeah.
Great. And I also noted earlier someone had asked about this being recorded, and so that yes, absolutely.
I did. Yes, I responded to that in the chat already. So yeah.
Excellent. So we're going to be passing this along to others as well. So this is one idea. If you've got the sticky thoughts that keep sticking in there and coming back again and again and again, maybe see if you can create a little bit of space, between the thought and you acting on it or letting it have a hold on you, right? By filing it. So that's one idea that some athletes find really helpful. And another way to get unstuck from a thought is to actually unhook yourself by using a really goofy voice. So pick the silliest cartoon voice that you've ever heard of, or think of your favorite film with a character that you find humorous, and say that thing that you've been stuck on. Say it like 5 to 10 times in the goofy voice. Okay. And believe it or not, this can be really helpful at putting things into perspective and make you realize it's just a thought. It's not a fact. Thoughts are somewhere between 0% true and 100% true, right? And feelings aren't even facts, right? They're somewhere between 0% and 100%, right? But they're not necessarily helpful. So if you're using a bit of a goofy voice just to help lighten the moment, maybe create some distance. This is another one I find, particularly with younger athletes, they like this one because picking a cartoon is easy for them to think of, or a character from a movie that they like. And that's going to be your goofy voice when your self-talk isn't helpful. You might say a couple things to see if you can get a little more unstuck from it. Other things that you can do aren't just the way that you think. It's the way that you act and behave and use things like breathing to change your state and help your nervous system when you're under a lot of pressure. So some of you may have already heard of box breathing before, but you can easily look up box breathing online. It's a pretty simple concept. This is just a diagram of how it works. It doesn't necessarily have to be 4 seconds. You may not have 4 seconds, but it's breathing in for the 4 seconds and then holding for 4 and then exhaling for 4 and then holding for 4 again and repeating as many times as you would need to. So this can be really helpful in competition. It can be helpful when you need to do some recovery. It can be helpful in practice or when there's a timeout, or even, in you're studying and you're just about to, or you're getting ready to write an exam or a test. This can help you stay a little more present, focused, and help calm your nervous system. Other things you can do also, if you're feeling that like you're really having trouble self-regulating, and maybe you've got a bit of a break and you've got a small cold cloth nearby or a cold water bottle, you can just put it on the back of your neck or you can put it on your chest. And that actually can really help with nervous system regulation as well, because we have this really important nerve, the vagus nerve, that either the back of your neck or your chest, you can have a lot of relief. I work a lot in sports that have a lot of fear involved and danger involved. And that cold compress on the back of the neck or on the chest can really be soothing for some athletes in that moment when they're feeling really stressed out. So that's just an easy, quick one that you probably have handy with you if you've got a towel and you've got a water bottle. That's all you need. And then I mentioned this a little bit earlier. Volleyball is like the ultimate co-regulation sport because you don't just have to do everything on your own. It's a team sport, which is super cool and what I love so much about it. So whether it's beach where it's 2 people coming together, or for those of you that play indoor, or maybe some of you play both, right? You've got the high fives, you've got fist pumps, you've got doing a team cheer together. When you're in support role on the bench all coming together and coming up with cheers and connecting. When you're standing, all in a lineup with your arms around each other, standing in unity along the line on the baseline. That is such, I always love it when I see the photographs of that. It looks so good, or we gather as a circle. I love it so much about volleyball. It's like there's such a team. It's such a team sport. It looks so beautiful. So the team cheer and the fist pumps and the high five, but also when you're in that circle or along the line, you could do a big box breathing deep breath, right? Together. And also you could take a look at each other and do a buddy system, where if you can spot that somebody's energy is getting low or someone seems to be making a lot of unforced errors and they're struggling, let them know that you're with them, right? Say their name. Hey, Emma, I got you. I'm here. I see you, girl. I see you, Shanice. I see you, Derek. I'm here, right? So be that teammate. Sometimes it'll be you needing the co-regulation, but sometimes you're going to need to give it to someone else. And you can even see yourself and feel yourself in advance. We discussed visualization as a tool in 2 of our previous webinars as well on mental skills and performance anxiety as well. But really taking some time to see yourself in whatever role you want to be in or that you anticipate yourself being in, and seeing yourself accomplishing that and seeing it with clarity and feeling the emotions that you're going to feel and what that's going to look like. That can be really powerful too. But that's just sort of a smattering of a bunch of different self-regulation skills and co-regulation skills. But I'm wondering if there are certain things that really were helpful to Shanice and Derek when they were competing, and stuff that they feel would be important to add, or maybe some of those ideas and then putting them into practice. Do you have anything else that you think would be important for tonight, either of you?
I can jump in here. Yeah, I think this idea of like how do we, it's a little bit like I think when you did the neck thing, that sort of reminded me of this idea of how do we, I guess, bring in like some kindness and like some compassion and sort of this idea of just like a soothing touch in a way, I think can be like really powerful. And again, it's like can feel like wrong place, wrong time, because you're in the middle of this like intense volleyball game. But I know there can be like a lot of power for me of even just like putting a hand kind of on the chest, even like sometimes a fist really helps. Like just that like there's something sturdying about that. And I think for me, like that sometimes just really helps in my life and when I'm in high pressure situations of just sort of like finding ways to be kind of like nurturing to myself, because in that moment it's so big and intense, and sometimes all we want to do is just like make more of that like intensity, but sometimes we need just something that slows us down. And you know, I would encourage, if you're going to try it, like try it in the slow moments, like try it, you know, in practice or before practice, and notice what it feels like. I think that can be really helpful. Yeah, and then with that, sometimes just a reminder of, okay, if I can sort of catch myself in this moment, if I can unhook from some of those thoughts, what would I want to engage with instead? I think about like, what's a motto that I would have for myself as I'm approaching this. I was working with an athlete recently, and we kind of came up with like, I'm a learner was what was her motto, and it was just like in practice when she makes a mistake or when she gets aced, it's like, I'm a learner, I'm a learner, and just that reminder of like, what am I here for? What do I want to be about? What do I want to like kind of identify with? Which I know is kind of jumping ahead to maybe the next piece, but it is that idea of like, what kind of person do I want to be, and what story do I want to tell myself in this moment? So yeah, I don't know. Those are a couple of things that come to my mind.
Those are awesome. And I love that one. So it almost kind of tied into growth mindset too, right? Because she's getting that it isn't just about outcomes, like it's about her learning from it.
Mhm.
Love that.
Yeah.
Thanks, Derek. Awesome. What do you think, Shanice? Were there any in particular that you would want to add?
Maybe not necessarily adding, but just touching on. So one thing that we did with our team this year, was a collective deep breath as a unit, coaches included. And we would do this every day before training. And this was something that was new for our athletes. I think what they had done in previous years was they would do 30 seconds. Everyone would kind of close their eyes to get them in the space that they needed to individually in order to show up for training. And so I decided to make some changes to that because I also grew up doing that, but I felt like 30 seconds was really long. We would all touch up together, do one really deep breath in, one deep breath out, and then we would go start our training. And the athletes even adapted that to when we were playing matches. And those that were on the court, if at any point they were feeling some level of stress, they would all do that together. So that was something that we were able to apply this year and was successful. The other two things that I wanted to touch on, is just what worked for me growing up. And so I'm really lucky that I had a great coach when I was younger who helped me learn how to manage my self-talk and how to self-regulate. Um, Anytime we were in practice or in a game, and if he heard someone say my bad or oops or sorry, wherever he was in the gym, he would say, "Nope, don't say that." And we all knew what we had to correct it with. And we all had to change our language to, if we made an error, it was, I got the next one, or I'll do better next time. Something that was a little bit more forward thinking rather than staying in the past. And it's stuck with me ever since. Like, I don't think I've ever shown up to a practice or a match where maybe I've made 10 passing errors in a row. I'm still saying to myself, I got the next one. It could be 11 passing errors in a row. I got the next one. And so it's made it easier for me to manage errors or maybe negative gameplay, and something that I found really successful. And then I had one more that I wanted to touch on and I lost it. But yeah, those
Yeah.
were kind of the two big things that I wanted to touch on. And I think the collective deep breath with our athletes was super successful. And I think we had a team that was, we had a lot of people who were high anxiety, high stress people. And so when we reflected at the end of the year, it was unanimous that that was really successful for them to be able to like ground you and have something that you could lean on. Oh, okay. I knew it would come back to me. I got the last one. So, talking about co-regulation. So again, this is my own experience from playing beach volleyball, and Derek kind of touched about like the soft touch. And what I found really successful with co-regulation is just holding my partner's hand, whether I needed it or she needed it. It was just holding hands for an extended period of time, because you're almost sending that message to one another like, hey, I got you and I know you got me. And we might be sucking right now, we might be getting our butts kicked, or we might be doing really well, but at the end of the day, I got you and you got me, and that was really comforting to be able to manage stress that way.
I love that. Sometimes it could be so little. It could just be a little squeeze on a shoulder. It could be, whatever it is so powerful because it just sends this huge message to that other person's nervous system that they're not alone, and now suddenly you have the nervous system of another person helping you. So I love that. That's awesome. And I love that the team breath is so successful, and that your coach was so ahead of their time in terms of providing you with that self-talk awareness, like early on.
Mhm.
That is amazing. That is a gift,
Yeah,
honestly.
I
So
feel
great.
very lucky. And so now I try to be that person in the gym. Hey, did you say sorry? Nope, you got to change that. Something else.
Yeah, I was going to say, I bet that shows up in your coaching practice now. Exactly. Just like things show up in Derek's counseling practice, right? It all just kind of all comes back, and we can use all that later in life. So, and I wanted to draw a little bit of attention to the self-regulation strategies of the deep breath and Derek's idea of just be gentle, just soothe yourself in the moment, to all the parents in the stands. It's so important that we understand our levels of anxiety as sport parents in order to, I think, be the best version of sport parent of ourselves. We have so many examples in the media, unfortunately, of sport parents gone wild, and just like having some really antisocial behaviors that honestly, I know for many over the years, working with families and sometimes working very targeted with particular members of different families, helping the parents manage their own anxiety. These were really great people outside of, the playing environment. It's just they themselves never were really taught some of those self-regulation strategies, and you're so close and so connected emotionally to your children. We can lose sight of things like our first topic, perspective. We lose perspective, right? And we also forget that we too have to self-regulate. So we get right into the cheering and all that, but sometimes we forget and our nervous system takes over. And learning and being able to apply some of these self-regulation strategies to ourselves as parents, because I know what that felt like watching my own kids perform, even with all my training. It's like you just step out of your body and you become this super fan, right? But you gotta be thinking, who are we here for? We're here for our kids, right? So just a little note and a shout out of love and support for all you awesome parents and all that you do, but also telling you that you too can learn from these techniques and you too can benefit from them in high stress situations. So after those really awesome ideas from Derek and Shanice as well, we'll move to our third topic, last one of the evening, which is balancing athletic identity, right? And our identity. So this is a really great example in the bottom corner here. It's probably too small for you to read, so I'll just tell you what it's all about. It's about a really great American professional golfer named Scottie Scheffler. And it's a cue card that he wrote for himself when he was in a pretty high stakes and very high stress tournament called the Masters, which is kind of the ultimate professional golfing tournament in the United States and in the professional golfing circuit worldwide. And so in it, he writes, if I win this golf tournament, it will change my life on the golf course, absolutely, but it won't change my personal life. And that winning this golf tournament isn't going to, feed my soul or my heart. I know that going in, so that I'll play freely, knowing that the rest isn't really up to me, and to trust that I'm just going to do my best. So he did that in conjunction with his family. So talking with them ahead of time and balancing his family and the support that he had off of the golf course and all of that. Sure, if I do really well outcomes wise, that will change things for me on the course. But I've got all these other things that are so important and are so grounding for me. That's actually what I'm going to take with me onto the course. And that will set me free to just perform. Right. So when he started doing that and he shared that when they asked him, what was the big thing that set you free to have such a great day today? Well, then, of course, you got every golfer in the world writing cue cards now, right? Hoping that's the magical tool. But, it's only as good as how you apply the mental side of the cue card, right? So noting the other things, family, friends, your personal life, maybe special pets that mean so much to you, friends through school and school accomplishments. There's a lot more to athletes than just their sport performance, right? And so reminding them that there's a lot that they have to be grateful for and who are there with them and to support them. So that's something I try to make sure that we're building balance about anytime we're working with athletes. Also, we already discussed managing errors in the past and sort of different ways that we can move on past them. But I like having not just a post-error, but even like a post-performance ritual, how to move forward and balance things. So this is just one, you don't have to use this language if you don't want to, but there might be something that you just want, I'm dumping that. Like there's no sense even giving any more of my time towards that particular mistake or that particular thing that keeps haunting me. It's over, right? And I'm just going to have my mental garbage can, open it up, put it in, load it up, let the garbage disposal take care of it. Or maybe there were some really important elements to it that I may want to revisit later. It's important that I file it. It's actually going to help me grow as an athlete. So even though it's uncomfortable to think about now, it's an important thing to be able to file for later. So at least that way your brain has something to do with that difficult performance, right? What do I do with it? Some of it you might need to dump, and you never really need to go there too closely again. But some of it might need to be filed and revisited, and that's cool because we can grow from it. So it all depends on your personality and what might work for you. But these are some things. I work a lot with goaltenders, for example. And goalies really like this one because once you've been scored on, you really don't want to think about it again. No time soon anyway. It's not helpful. So they file quite a few, but they also dump quite a few goals too. So see what that might make sense for in your practice as a volleyball player. And then another thing, the last one before I turn it over to our ambassadors, is you may want to consider, if you're an athlete listening to this, seeing if you want to create a little mini group in your team who could be charged with creating a sense of balance on your team. So that might mean maybe you're the ones that you bring the sense of humor up, right? Or maybe you are the tempo changers, or you are charged with the music that you're listening to on the bus. Creating that, because you're going to have the pressure, you're going to have all the competitive demands, but are there other things as well that will help create that sense of balance? And I work with locally in Vancouver with a professional, our first professional women's soccer league, the Vancouver Rise, they're called, is the local team. And we've got a performance group of leaders that the coaches go to and ask them, they kind of represent the team on the performance related pieces, but they also have a leadership group that is called the balance group. And so, and this is in high performance even. This is important at every level because sport isn't just about outcomes and high performance, right? It's also about well-being and balance and being able to have the two show up in your tournaments and even in the everyday when you're training. So you might want to consider having a leadership group that's related to balance. So you could mention that to your coach, and we're going to be talking to coaches later tonight as well. So maybe we'll give them that idea. But that's another idea. But I'm wondering about this idea of identity and balancing that identity and asking if Shanice and Derek, if there are things that you think about back through your career, maybe where there was some imbalance and it was sort of like all in for volleyball, or do you feel like you did have coaches or had people around you to help you sustain that sense of balance? Or what would be your advice to developing athletes when it comes to that balance perspective? Whoever wants to address that.
I think we're flip-flopping here, so I'll take this one first. Yeah, this is a tough question, I think, to answer. I think, y- where I am now, everything's kind of easier in retrospect of maybe what I should have done when I was younger. Um, but I think this sense of balance is so important for kids. So to give context, I'm someone who I went 100% in volleyball. It took me very far. I was able to play post-secondary. I was able to represent our national team at the junior level, at the youth level, at the senior level. I went and played professionally. So it was kind of volleyball was building and building and building for me. And my dream goal was to go to the Olympics and to be an Olympian for Canada and get our women's team there. And as I'm on my trajectory, I get what could have been a career-ending injury in that I needed to get shoulder surgery, and that completely derailed me where it was like, I had to figure out who I was without this sport. Granted, I was a little bit older than someone who's a club athlete at the time, but I think challenge would still be the same. It's that this thing that you love to do that is such a big part of your life can be taken away from you at any point, really. Injuries can happen at any time. So I think it's so important for youth athletes, for older athletes as well, to be able to figure out who are you without the sport? What makes you happy? What do you enjoy academically? If you are an academic person, what do you enjoy creatively? What are your hobbies? What is your connection to your family like? And making sure that you're inputting some of your effort there as well, just as much as you're inputting your efforts into volleyball. I think that's like the one thing I would have wished that I did more as a kid instead of having to face it as a young adult and almost having like a midlife crisis. Um, but I think the other thing too, and it's easier for me to do now because I'm older, there's very seldom opportunities for me to play, but just having this perspective of I get to play volleyball. It's not that you have to play volleyball. It really is, I think, a privilege. It really is a beautiful game for so many reasons, for so many lessons that you learn however long you get to play it for. The reality is not everyone makes it maybe to the national level or to uh, the post-secondary level or to the professional level. But I think any opportunity you get to play, that's what you need to focus on. It's at the end of the day, it's not about the wins, it's not about the losses. It's about the opportunity to experience all of that with your friends, to learn new lessons on the court. So I think that's just the one thing if I could go back and change, it's that I would have been a well-rounded person and maybe would have approached volleyball with the mindset of like I get to do this every day so that when I was faced with this hardship of an injury that it wouldn't be such a punch to the gut for lack of a better word.
Oh, that's a great, thank you for sharing that perspective, sort of looking back. That's a big one. And that it ties in nicely of sort of our last webinar because we actually talked about sport injury and it came up as a bit of a sub theme in there as well. So that's a really great. So now we got to, yeah, that's an advertisement to go back and people have to watch the sport injury one in case they didn't watch it. Derek was featured in that one as well, Derek. So what else are you thinking, Derek? Thank you so much, Shanice. What about this idea of identity, Derek? And balance.
I'm trying to think if there's anything I'd add to that because that was just perfect. I don't know, like it's very well said, and yeah, yeah. I mean, I think just hitting a lot of points. I also would have named as well in there too. So I don't know if there's more I would even want to add.
I'll tell them to go back and listen to what you said in the last
Yeah,
webinar as
yeah.
well.
I mean, I think because the injuries definitely shake you up a little bit. That thing we thought was uh, our identity was tied to, now we no longer have, and I think it's those can be really challenging moments. Those losses, they're really painful because we lose something that really meant something to us, obviously. But I think it can also be an awakening to what does really matter at the end of the day, and what can you control and what can you focus on, and how do you make that the priority over just the performance. And I think the fun thing to discover in some ways is that when we can make our performance more about our purpose, sorry, we can make our identity more about our purpose and who we want to be, that has a funny way of actually influencing our ability to perform. When we aren't so focused on the outcomes all the time and more focused on how do I want to show up in this next moment? Who would I want to be? What would I want to be connected to as a person? What that frees us up from like outcomes and expectations and allows us to be present to what's actually like within the, I often say, like, tend to the garden you can touch, you know, and if you can tend to that, there's a lot more that can be done there. And then that ends up actually allowing you to perform better. I find, you know, so yeah, that would be all maybe I would add to that.
I love it. Thank you so much. That's a really great point to end on in regards to that idea of balance and identity. And so I guess whether athletes are watching this live tonight or their parents, or they're watching it later on through a recording, maybe you can think about two different intentions. So maybe there are some thought or some perspective shifts that occurred to you when you listened to this webinar tonight. And there might be a couple things like very action oriented that you can do. What are some behaviors and some things that you could do even at your very next practice that you learned tonight, right? So taking some action from these as well. So really listening when we're putting these tools out there, but also applying them and think about how could this fit into my practice, is our hope anyway, when we're giving all these great resources to athletes across the province. So that's all that we have prepared for our evening, Emma. I don't know if we have any.
I cannot see any questions, and I actually just looked back at the questions that people submitted ahead of time, and I think that you nailed almost all of them. I couldn't see something that we hadn't been added, so I think we will leave it there. Just to remind everybody that you will get a copy of this recording, and it will be available on our safety hub that is on volleyballbc.org. That's where we keep all of our different webinars, and as Shaunna referred to, there's a whole load of different topics that we've covered over the last couple of years. So thank you, all of you, Shaunna, Shanice, Derek. It's always a pleasure to listen to all of you. And I'd like to finish by wishing everybody the best of luck going into the provincial championships. So I will see you all at Richmond or TradeX, no doubt. But yeah, have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you.